Okay, so this is part two of this discussion about the business of law. And the theme I want to get at here is what I'm calling the plateau problem. Um, and to set the stage for this, when I started doing this type of practice more, I was looking at it very much from the perspective of somebody who, frankly, I had no knowledge of really business of law type concepts. I'm not able to speak English apparently, but anyway, that whole world was very unfamiliar to me. What was familiar to me a little bit was the world of independent music and independent film, where people will create projects under various kind of scrappy financing models, and they'll just do it because they passionately care about what they're doing. And so the model for me, as weird as this may sound, in doing law was the band Fugazi, which was kind of a 90s era post hardcore band out of Washington, D.C., who put out their own records and were very rigorous, you could say, about trying to keep down the costs of their shows for audience members and always having it be all ages shows and so forth. They were very, very serious about that, but they were very successful at the same time. And that to me was an interesting model. I thought, well, maybe I can do law that's like that. It's very idealistic. It's not focused primarily on producing money, even if it does produce money. And, maybe we can do it that way without having a giant budget. And the thing that I came to realize was that to some extent, that is the case. On a case by case basis, it's possible to pursue litigation and even get somewhere with litigation and produce a good return, or at least a reasonable return for a client. Because the costs of litigating a case, let's say a civil rights case that involves filing the complaint, um, serving defendants, performing several depositions. It's several $1,000s, but it's not $100,000. And I get into in the essay, which again is the point of all these videos is the essay, which is linked in the description and it'll be on the website. I get into the specific numbers that I think might be a reasonable estimate for a given type of case. But the point of what I'm saying in the essay is that like those cases can be litigated without extraordinarily exorbitant costs. It may depend to some extent on whether experts are needed, because experts' time is very expensive. And so if you've got to have a use of force expert or a police practices expert or a prison expert or whatever, that's going to be a large chunk of money. And particularly if the case goes all the way to trial, well, now that is going to get quite expensive. But most cases don't go to trial. Even in civil rights, you can count on the idea that some of them are going to settle. And so it's possible to litigate these cases without having a giant bankroll. Either you can do it through credit cards or just through having a little bit of savings that you put into the case. And so that was exciting to me. And my initial thought was, well, that's great. I can just litigate these cases on a small budget, pursue them, and little by little, I will develop into a civil rights lawyer, or I'll have a civil rights practice. And you can think of it in whatever ways it applies to your own practice or your own version of a practice. But that was what I was thinking. I'll just sort of evolve into that. But the plateau problem is this: cash flow that sustains a person month in and month out is not the same thing as working for years and then getting a few $1,000s as a fee in a case. Because even if the few $1,000s feels like a substantial sum of money on an annualized basis, and perhaps if the case is stretched out for 2 or 3 years, it doesn't actually look like that much at all. In fact, it's pretty poor. And that was what I came to understand over time. And this may be really obvious to some people. And as I say, I didn't have an experience or a background in the business side of law because I had spent years doing post-conviction work where the compensation is more almost like being a contractor for the state, essentially. And so it's much more linear in terms of your time in and the payment out. So this notion of like developing a portfolio of cases and a pipeline of cases and the costs and the payout associated with that piece of it wasn't something I thought through too much until it occurs to me, or it occurred to me, that in fact there isn't any way to move from this one-off type of success into an actual practice that is sustainable to me as the proprietor of the practice, because I have to always have additional funding coming in from some other source to get me through the months and months and months, or even years and years and years, when I'm just litigating the case and there's not any money coming in. And also to sort of offset or hedge against the uncertainty that some cases will not prevail, because they're not all going to prevail. The very nature of this practice and civil rights is that some of these cases are challenging. It's not processing auto collisions. And there's obviously lots of immunities for government actors. And so there has to be some recognition of that potential for the practice to just sort of plateau. Like it can be successful in some sense in producing results for a case here and a case there and a case there over the years, and yet not be big enough to really take off and become a going concern of its own. And the problem I get into, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in the next video, is the notion of having just sort of what you might call base hit cases. You know, cases that settle for, say, a moderate five-figure settlement, such that they're, that's a significant sum of money, but yet the work that goes into them can be quite significant. And if you're relying entirely on those sort of base hit type scenarios, then it can be very hard to put together an annualized rate of return that is even close to, the salary of a public defender, never mind the salary of a city attorney or a county council who's opposing you, who's getting paid probably 3 or 4 times as much just to, raise qualified immunity arguments and defeat you. Not that I'm bitter. Anyway, so there's that plateau problem. And it raises these questions of, well, how do you move beyond that plateau? And I will talk about that more in the following video. But so this starts to sketch out this challenge of like, yes, you can succeed on an individual level, but that's not the same thing as having a viable practice, because a practice is a whole portfolio of cases, a whole pipeline progressing through time. And to get that pipeline going in a way that's going to sustain you is a capital challenge, and that's kind of the crux of the whole thing. All right, more soon.